Hull KR and Cass can't catch a trick. Warrington Wolves, they laid it on thick, fighting hard until the final bell, with Catalans, York and Bradford as well. Players dropping like flies each match. Is player welfare currently up to scratch as Huddersfield hopes of a win took a dive? Luke Robinson got his P45. Hull FC beat Leeds for their boss. Lee and John are here with the goss. Welcome to the 14th episode of Super League 360, a podcast primarily designed to show off my poetry and also to talk about the top tier of British Rugby League. My name is Lee Addison.
And my name is John Davidson.
Are you sure?
Sorry, you had a bit of a glitch.
Are you sure?
You had a bit of a glitch. The Wi-Fi in South Yorkshire, it's not the best.
I'm also the host of the Rugby League Coach podcast and feature on the Loose Carry podcast from Zero Tackle. I'm a coach in Australia, John a journo in the UK. Please read the description of this podcast or listen to old ones so we can make this long intro shorter. The podcast being aired on the Ashes Rugby League Coach, and podcast platforms, as well as the Rugby League Coach YouTube. So if you subscribe to those, you won't miss a thing. Also, thanks to rugbyleague.com, who are taking our podcast after the hooter this week. Thank you for your support of that, which we do straight after a fixture. It will be after Thursday's fixture, which I believe is Cass versus Bradford. But the big news, straight off the top, John, Luke Robinson sacked at Huddersfield this afternoon. It's been a big day. It's been a big day.
It has been a big day, yeah. That news came through, what was it? Just checking exactly the hour. About 4 or 5 hours ago, 6 hours ago, should I say. Luke Robinson terminated as head coach. He took over 2024 after Ian Watson was also dismissed. And Huddersfield have lost all 5 games so far this season. The only team to have not won a game. In a way, not surprising that they have gotten rid of Robinson, but in a way, also a little bit surprising because they've got 16 players out injured. They've got a huge injury crisis, and Huddersfield as a club, we can talk about it in depth, but they haven't been unleashed for a long, long time, really, Lee. And they're saying they're unleashed, but there's big problems off the field as well as on the field for Huddersfield.
Well, if you're wondering what John is going on about, he's talking about the words of Ralph Rimmer there, director of change at Huddersfield. And I think the only thing he has changed so far is what he's done today, which is the coach. And he said, quote, "We have been resetting the club. We've set about that prior to Christmas, driving the club forward off the field. But critically, we need some on-field success as well. A fantastic man, Luke Robinson, a legend of this club and will remain so. But nevertheless, this set of circumstances has brought about this change," close quotes. Look, John, I understand what people say about the injuries, but like I've said before on this podcast, ad nauseum, a lot of that can be down to the coach as well. Luke Robinson is a fantastic bloke. I was at Wigan with him. He really is a good lad. He was a young kid coming through then and full of energy for the game. And I don't think that energy is diminished in any way, shape or form. But unfortunately, I honestly believe that he was out of his depth as a coach. And I mean, defensively, Huddersfield just don't look like they've been coached so far. That's me being critical from an analytical point of view. There'll be so many things you and I don't know, but you did hint, I think there, John, that there's other things going on at the club that could be contributing to their malaise right now.
Yeah, I mean, they haven't... I was looking, actually, just recapping before we recorded, I wrote a piece in 2019 about, issues at Huddersfield and, how they've really, the Super League era at least, they've not really achieved anything. They won the League Leaders' Shield in 2013 under Paul Anderson, and... Even when they were, top of the league then and doing really well, they never had a big fan base. And historically, they haven't won, a premiership or the Challenge Cup since, I think it was the 50s and the 60s, and they had their golden period, I think, was in the 20s. So they've been a club that's never really won a lot. But in the Super League era, they've gone through something like, I think it's 5 to 6 coaches in the last 9 years. And Luke Robinson was obviously interim for a bit, and then... he's later was made permanent in 2024, but they've had Rick Stone, they had Simon Wolford, they had Chris Norman as an interim coach, they had Ian Watson. And it just seems to be like a culture problem at the club, a leadership problem. They're a very closed-off club. They don't do a lot of media, a lot of engagement. Their crowds have just gone down and down, so you really question how much, engagement the community they do. They've got stadium issues. They want to move to Halifax. But you sort of wonder how that's going to, just moving to a smaller stadium is going to help them. Are there fans in Huddersfield going to travel to Halifax? I know it's not far, but that never really seems to work. And they've just sort of had the same leadership there for a long, long time. Obviously, Richard Thewlis is the managing director, but you never really hear from him or see from him. The recruitment over the years has been terrible. And while their academy, they have actually turned their academy around, they have produced a few good players in recent years, but generally they've either lost them or they've gone to other clubs. So, I mean, Dom Young is probably the best example, and he's been great for the Knights in the NRL. Jake Wardle, has won numerous trophies at Wigan, and Will Price, obviously he went down to the NRL, didn't do well at Newcastle, but is over at Hull FC. They just can't seem to build anything. So they've recycled through coach after coach. Nothing really happens. They did have a good period at the start when Ian Watson came over and they finished third and made the Challenge Cup final in, I think it was 2022. But then that went downhill, and then he got the axe in 2 years ago. So it's just the same old story for Huddersfield. Nothing really seems to improve.
I think if you put them in a sunnier climate and change the colour of the seats at the stadium and put a Gold Coast Titans kit on them, there'd be so many similarities, wouldn't they, in terms of if you like a franchise that just seems to be constantly doomed. And I think rugby league clings on to Huddersfield a little bit because it's the birthplace of the game. Yeah. But the reality is it probably hasn't ever really brought, and this is going to sound horrible, and Huddersfield fans might cancel us now. They might never listen to this podcast again, but they've not brought that much to Super League basically in 30 years, quite frankly. If anything, they've brought more questions. They've brought more sadness or contemplation about their crowds and their performances. And I think back to the Huddersfield-Sheffield merger, the ill-fated merger. So there's just been one thing after another, and they play in what was at the time a shiny new stadium. I don't know how good it looks and feels now, but it's only 25 years old, basically, ish.
I was there 2 weeks ago. It's a nice stadium, but if you only get 5,000 people turn up and it's 24,000 capacity, it doesn't look or sound great. But the thing that you mentioned, the birthplace of rugby league, and that gets mentioned, the reality is it was only the birthplace of rugby league because it was in between where all these clubs were meeting.
Yeah,
they were coming from Lancashire and wherever, and
yes, that's right,
from Yorkshire. It wasn't, the game didn't start in Huddersfield because it was a stronghold of rugby league. I mean, Huddersfield Town, the local soccer club, get a lot bigger crowds. So it's a football town, basically. It is a football town, and look, there is a rugby league fan base there, and there are rugby league clubs there, and it's obviously in an area of West Yorkshire where you've got Halifax and Leeds and Wakefield all relatively close, but it is more of a football town. But the thing is, they seem to be quite a backward club to me, Huddersfield. They don't really seem very modern. They don't, I mean, not that this is the be-all and end-all, but they don't hold a media day at the start of the year. They do a sponsors thing and they invite 3 journos. So they're never really trying, like, you talk about crowds and marketing your team and your club. They don't really do much to actually, try and engage and, get publicity. And, you've got to do things if you want people to come and see your team. And it's not just about a winning team. I had a Huddersfield saying that, we want to, it's like, your team doesn't always win, that's a reality, but you build connections, don't you, with fans. You go into schools, you get publicity and you try and get attention and you build that relationship. And it just doesn't seem, there are some diehard Huddersfield fans out there, but there's clearly not enough of them. And,
I mean, we're going to talk soon about the potential for an NRL purchase, and I think Huddersfield will be absolutely in the crosshairs if they're going to trim the competition again. You can tweet John, because he loves tweeting, Johnny. He just loves it, at Johnny D. Davidson. And I've pulled out a couple of the tweets that you've done in the last week. Which kit did you say was awful?
Oh, I already get blamed that I have an agenda against Lee. But yeah, the Lee kit that I wore against Wakefield was...
Describe it, or I might just have a look at the highlights now and see what...
Well, you can have a look. It's kind of multi-dotted red, white, black, but it reminds me of the vomit kit that the Socceroos wore in 1993, which, looks like someone's thrown up. And it's just it's just a personal preference.
Sorry, there's just a bit of a nose coming from my phone while I look at the highlights. Yeah. Look, we've got to be careful about criticising kits. Do you remember a couple of weeks ago I said Wigan's kit was awful at Toulouse? Apparently that was because they were wearing a special kit for a young girl that
well, you've been cancelled. You've been cancelled.
I know. Yeah. And somebody emailed me and they said, I don't want to make you feel awful, Lee, but I'm about to make you feel awful. And but I appreciated it. And I did feel awful. And I do feel awful. And I forgot to mention it last week. But what I'm going to say back is, I don't know if Wigan made it clear that widely. And I think if they're going to do something like that, they probably need to do it at home, not an away game at Toulouse. Because I looked at the kit on the highlights. I didn't know the backstory. I looked at it. I thought, that kit's awful. That's not Wigan. I used to work at Wigan, so I'm very conscious of what the colour schemes are and whatnot. And my first instinct was that kit's awful. And then it turns out it was a tribute kit to a local young lady who's not been very well. So my love to that family, and well done Wigan for doing that. But maybe... Toulouse away wasn't the best option. So I'll look at the Lee kit in a minute while you talk about and we talk about the next tweet that I think you did on Saturday. Players dropping like flies, brutal. Nicola Jane Lawson sent us a question and said, has the quest to speed up the game impacted the Super League injury crisis? Constant 6-agains leading to more pressure on joints and muscles, with the twisting, turning and speed required, constantly moving back from tackles, all for us not to have a cleaner ruck. Anyway, in my opinion, Billy Stead, only a matter of an hour ago, I think, has said the standard officials in Super League right now, and the fact the 6-again rule is so different depending on who refs it and why it's so different game to game. I am huge, John. I keep injury stats every year. In the NRL, before round 3 started, there were 59 injured players. So that is 3 squads of 19 plus 1, I think, if my maths are right. Maybe it was 58. In the Super League, it was 89 injured players before round 5.
I think there was probably another 10 to add, at least probably in the last 2 days.
Roughly. So, yeah, that said before round 5. So add another 10, and right? So... Right now, across our top competitions, our 2 top competitions, we've got the equivalent of 8 squads out. Now, when is somebody who is paid good money at the top of the game in England or Australia going to start look at what we are doing to our players? Because we're obsessed with what happens above the neck. You get hit around the head, you're sin bin, sent off, it's the end of the world, and you stood down for a few weeks as a player if you've been hit around the head. But, John, I have my moments where old football injuries come back to bite me. If I'd have played top level all my life, I have no doubt that right now I would really be struggling to walk, to do things, etc., etc. Everything below the neck has a mental impact as well, so it inadvertently impacts the above the neck scenario. We are treating our players like they are cattle. It's gone crazy. Now, soon I'll let you mention your tweet in a moment. But this is something I'm really passionate about, John. The the game in England has obviously switched to 6 again rule and the faster rucks. And as I say, in England, I don't think the pre-season is long enough. The season ends for so many. Well, first of all, it ends a week later than it does in the NRL, even though it starts a month or two earlier. We've also had the Ashes, and every year there's something international for England because the RFL needs to raise money. So our players don't get proper physical conditioning. In Australia, I think they do too much, and it's too brutal because of the amount of injuries that happen before the season. So I think somewhere in the middle is the answer. I've spoken about that on this podcast before. But ultimately, the one common denominator between the two competitions right now is the ruck speed and the 6 agains. And that goes to Billy's question about the refereeing and the interpretations, but also to Nicola's question about the physical aspects and the physical impacts of the players. So, John, I've had my little rant. What say you?
Yeah, I think I agree with you in part. I think the speeding of the ruck, surely has been a factor. I think there are a number of factors, and you've got to. I'm sort of careful not to lump everything down to one thing because, 2 of the injuries I think in the Catalans game against Hull KR were concussions. So
John, I'm going to stop you right there. Concussions can be because you are fatigued without knowing you're fatigued and you've put your head in the wrong place.
That can be, and then you could say the hip drop on the St. Helen on host, the St. Helens forward the week before.
Technique.
Well, yeah, but it was just, there
because
are
you're tired.
Yeah, or
because the game's faster.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, but I think there are a number of factors, and I think you are bang on about the pre-season, the lack of rest. The season is way too long, and you look at until whatever it was a couple of years ago. There was the Easter program where players would play 2 games in 3 days.
Yes.
And they were doing that up until recently. I remember interviewing a number of Australian and Kiwis players about it, and they just couldn't really believe it. But it was pointed out, this is what we do here, and blah blah blah. But it was just basically because they knew they would make more money in that weekend because they'd have games on public holidays where more people could attend. So the players, there is no players union in the UK, so the player welfare is almost non-existent. But I think the pre-season is a big thing. The shortness of it, they play way too many games in the UK. The season started mid-Feb, and the first Super League season started 30 years ago on the 29th of March. So somehow we've got like 6 weeks earlier.
I looked at it. It was about 2000, 2001. We started to creep it up, basically.
And there's also the Challenge Cup, which is another tournament that doesn't exist in there. Also, we need and look, I think player loads. I've had one coach, commenting about another coach, allegedly being quite bad with managing training loads. There is a lack of depth, so I think certain players probably have to play more games to carry teams than others. Yeah, it's just not a good look, and there definitely needs to be someone looking at it because, the product, if it isn't already suffering, will suffer, and it's just not great. Yeah, players are breaking down a lot more, so we need to look at rest periods. We need to look at what strength and conditioning is doing. We need to look at there's supposed to be a mandatory, about how many minutes players can play a season. Does that need to be reduced? I think there's lots of things we should be looking at. But yeah, it's not. It is a real concern because every time, particularly this weekend in Super League, you watch a game and you're like, oh, okay, there's an injury. That guy's getting carried off. Catalans, I think Catalans lost 4 players. I think it was during the game, as in
Wow.
couldn't come in the field. And I think the NRL moving to the 6-man bench, I think that's a good idea. I know it's been criticised by some NRL players, but I think that's a step forward. But yeah, it's a massive concern, Lee.
Because they're dropping so much like flies in Super League, it smacks of under conditioning. Okay, so it would be like me and you going playing Super League now. We would get injured in 5 minutes because we've not trained. Okay, for the game.
10 seconds.
Well, no, we're not going to touch the ball for 4 minutes and 40.
I'll have a heart attack. After the first
No,
set.
I'm good. I do a bit of running. So there's that. They definitely look under conditioned in England. In Australia, they look sometimes over-conditioned. You can't accuse the players of not being ready to play at the start of round one in many cases because they're ultra fit over here. This constant effort to speed up the game is putting people in positions where they're fatigued, like our question said, they're putting their heads in the wrong place, putting their limbs in the wrong place. And I was due to be on the Loose Carry podcast. Sorry, I am still on the Loose Carry podcast in a couple of hours from this recording, and Chad Townsend was going to be on there, but apparently he's not now. I was going to ask him because he's on the Rugby League Players Association. They need to get together and sort this out because I don't know any competition in the world where you do some quick maths. Eight squads of 31. How many top flight teams is there? So there's 14 top flight teams in the UK and there's 17 in England. Is that 31?
17 in Australia, yep.
So in Australia, sorry, yeah. So 31. So 8 of 31, nearly 1/3 of our top flight sports people are injured. And if we were having, I don't know, a big boxing match and one boxer was half injured, it would impact the event wouldn't it? Right? And if the Premier League had 1/3 of its players unavailable, there'd be less quality players playing in the Premier League, the Champions League, etc. I just think something has to change urgently because it's not getting the attention that head knocks get. It's really scary. Johnny's jab this week. People who think increasing the salary cap in England won't stop players going to the NRL. Talk about that.
Yeah, well, so I was on the back of obviously Mikolaj Ledski, the announcement that he would be signing for Perth, joining them at the end of the year. Now, I broke the story that Perth were after him just before round one. Copped a bit of stick from some Leeds fans on Twitter. Yeah. And then obviously Mikolaj spoke at the season launch and he was sort of saying there's nothing in it, blah, blah, blah. Now, probably not the smartest comments to make, but look, fans seem to think, clubs and players, everything they is, sometimes they can't say what they really think or, they're smart enough to, obfuscate, shall we say.
Allegedicate.
Yeah. But look, he is going, and if you look at it from a Leeds point of view, so they're losing Newman, they're losing McDonald, and they're losing Ledski all to Perth. That's 3 England internationals. 2 of them that they've produced. Obviously, McDonald was a Wigan junior who signed for Leeds. So that's a big blow. And also, if you look at it from the Super League competition, there is quite an exodus at the moment of players going to the NRL. So there's those 3. There's George Williams, who's also going. Morgan Knowles left and joined the Dolphins, didn't he? Morgan Gannon also left Leeds to go and join the Warriors. And I think there's 1 or 2 others that I'm forgetting off the top of my head, but they're all England internationals, so they're amongst the best players in the competition, apart from Gannon, who's played for the England Knights and will no doubt one day play for England in a senior international. So it is a bit of a concern. Obviously, Perth and PNG coming in, and Perth have really targeted. Owen Trout, that's the other one. Sorry, Owen Trout's going to Cronulla. From Lee, also played in the Ashes for England. So it's a real issue that, the best players from Super League are going down to the NRL, being targeted. And there's been some talk in Super League amongst the clubs about raising the cap. I know Wigan were pushing for it. That seems to have, there's enough opposition. And a lot of fans seem to think, it won't change anything, But it will change. It won't stop all players going to the NRL, but it will stop some because the NRL salary cap is 3 times higher than the Super League salary cap. It hasn't grown for a long, long time. And I think what Wigan were advocating was dispensations for your own players that you've produced through your pathways. So, for Leeds, that would have meant they could have offered Newman or Gannon or Ledski, more money under the cap, or that isn't included in the cap. And I think that's a very smart way to incentivize these clubs to produce your own players.
But what happens is clubs and towns where there's not many local juniors, they rally against that in the meetings, and it all comes down to numbers.
Yeah,
in the meetings, that's what happens.
The thing is that people forget, Lee, is that these clubs that produce, the most players, a lot of them are players that aren't actually from their towns. Like, look at
That's right.
you mentioned Wigan. So Wigan have got Morgan Smithies and Matty Nicholson playing in the NRL for Canberra. They're both from Halifax. They recruited from Halifax at 15. Wigan have done that with a number of players. Look at St Helens. Mark
Comes down to resources, doesn't it? It comes down to the ability to pay a scout or give the scout 6 tracksuits and say, go to Halifax, find this player. Look, in terms of your point about the salary cap, movement between England and Australia used to be very common because the English game was played in the winter. The Australian game was played in the
80s.
Yeah.
You're talking about the 80s, yeah.
And the near
early
100...
90s.
Well, yeah, and hang on, let me talk. And the previous 90 years before it, John, right? So players used to move between countries quite regularly, and they could because they could finish their season, go over, right? And then all of a sudden, we brought it in line in 96. Yeah. I remember in 96, Phil Clark happened to be at the Roosters. And then there wasn't anything for a few years. And then Adrian Morley was the first to jump across.
Exactly.
And then a few years later, Burgess, Graham. That's basically how it went. Now it's turning into a procession. The only reason it's changed is because of finances, because of financial. The NRL has been the best competition in the world throughout that time since at least 96. When we aligned our competition. So this talk of the salary cap is right. The problem Matt Peters got, the problem Wigan have got is until the structure of the league, until the structure of the meetings are such that the powerful clubs get more power, basically, because of the realities of the competition. There's currently 14 teams in Super League. If they all got one vote in a meeting, you can bet your bottom dollar that the lower clubs will be slamming down on any suggestions of increasing the salary cap. And then that depends on how the league gets restructured, if it gets restructured again. And we've got points to talk about that too. John, this week, the Rugby League tweet of the week, Lee's laugh. Media watch, every other facet of what we're doing on this podcast. The award goes to Bill Quinn, the Oldham chairman. Now, you sent me that tweet, and I think I started one of my days with that this week. And
it's Thursday night,
Friday morning. So Friday morning, yeah, thank you. And I'm watching this half asleep, so I'm sort of listening to it. And I'm hearing this guy go on about Bill Quinn. Bill Quinn doesn't do this. Bill Quinn does that. Bill Quinn, blah, 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 blah. I thought the Oldham chairman was Bill Quinn, because I looked at the tweet at Oldham chairman and I thought the Oldham chairman was Bill Quinn. And by the time I'd got to about 7 minutes of listening to this, I checked, and yes, it was Bill Quinn talking about Bill Quinn. So that's my first laugh. Second laugh, and it was in his first few verses of his sermon, he was criticising whoever used to do the contracts for putting in things like you play 10 games, you get a bonus, you do this, you get a bonus. In other words, every rugby league contract that's ever existed, basically. So criticising them for doing an NRL, a contract, that has ever existed, the same kind of contract that every other club in the NRL Super League Championship, Queensland Cup does, right? New South Wales Cup. Thirdly, criticising all his fans. We seem to have more keyboard warriors than everyone else. No, Bill, that's because they're the only ones that you look at, mate. Fourthly, he needs somebody to look after his messaging. He was all over the show and he did 19 minutes of it. Even people on social media were saying, can anybody summarise this because I've not got 19 minutes? It was the funniest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, look, I mean, as you said at the start, whenever you start referring yourself in the third person, it's never a good sign, is it? I've never
Lee Addison laughed at it, man. Crazy.
Yeah. And the other bit, when you start attacking your own fans, I mean, I don't really know what you're going to achieve with that. Like,
no.
I mean, you're always going to get, look, the modern world, I can go outside now and say the sky is blue, and someone will go on social media and say, no, it's green, you're an idiot. Like, you're always going to get criticism, you're always going to get hate, whatever, abuse. You've just got to suck that up, because when you start attacking your own fans, whether they are right or wrong, you're just going to stop people, buying your kit and going to your games, and you're lumping them all together. So, yeah, that was a night. The thing that struck me is just like, how in English Rugby League is there so many owners who are just like a little bit out there? Like, it's a common, we've had it with Mark Campbell at Featherstone, we had it at Kukash at Salford. We've got it with certain owners in Super League at the moment. They're a little bit mad.
I think you've got to be mad to just throw your money at something and that is going to make a profit. Isn't going to make a profit.
And I do understand that, but it is a decision that you don't have to make. And, there would be clubs, obviously the owners who put their money in are great, but it doesn't also give you a right to just go out and slag off the fans and employees and just, you know what I mean? Like, if you buy a club, yes, it is a business, but it is also something that's fabric of that community, and it means more than just, a business that sells tickets and whatever else. Like, it's, while it's professional sport, there also is something a bit deeper than that. And I think, any owner, or at least, the smart ones realize they are custodians of that club for a certain period. And I think it was Steve Mascord, and I've said this before, he tweeted, would you see, the owner of the LA Lakers or the owner of the Brisbane Broncos or, the owner of Manchester City coming out with a 19-minute video like that? And no, you wouldn't. There's a good reason.
The chairman of Man City, not the owner, he just does one interview a year with an in-house interviewer and comes across fantastically. The key issue, though, that we're missing is what is actually going on at Oldham. So, from what I can gather, because I had to pull it out of the 19 minutes, what it was trying to say, basically, they're worried financially because they spent a lot of money on players, probably more money than the current administration believes they should have spent. So the blame game started, and now there's players getting loaned out. And I had to laugh. Alan Kilshaw came from Keighley, and two of the players have been loaned back to Keighley. So,
yeah, I mean, part of it is the subtext is the falling out with Mike Ford, who obviously left. What was it? A couple of rounds ago, and that's who was in charge of contracts to the club. So there's a falling out there. Then there's the legal case with Boundary Park, which is the home ground of Oldham Athletics, so they can't play there, which Bill King talked about. And yeah, they are on a massive budget, probably too much money for the championship, and they are jettisoning players. But yeah, it's a bit of a mess, isn't it? When you've got allegations swirling around and court cases. They're having to play at an amateur ground at Bowerfold. It's just a mess. But look, it's a bit of light entertainment for those people who want to watch a 19-minute video.
Is Oldham in trouble? Is the club going to be another Featherstone? Salford?
I don't know if it's in trouble in that sense, because, as I said, they had that winding up order that was paid off. They do have court cases going on, but Bill Quinn, if you watch that video, he seems very committed. He's firing shots, but he won't give up. So look, he seems to be the main.
That's good. Yeah.
But yeah, it's not a great way to run your club, is it? And if you look at the best owners, say in Super League, you don't have Neil Hudgell coming out with that. You don't have Mike Danson coming out with that.
No.
It's just not a great way.
You don't have Sheikh Mansour coming out with that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's not a good look for the sport.
Or the Glazers at United.
Yeah, but it's not a good look for the sport. It's not a good look if you're an Oldham fan, is it?
James has only sent me 2 poems this week. And the second one was, this is the official offering. Thanks, James. York's performance at Wigan was a major Super League building brick. Castleford were the victims as Warrington's attack produced every magic trick. Early in the season, Bradford, Saints, Wakefield, Leeds, also Toulouse are doing fine, while Lee and Hull KR are too close to Super League tables bottom line. While Hull and Catalans won at venues far-flung, Huddersfield are still stuck on the ladder's bottom rung.
I think one poem per podcast is probably enough, mate.
You're not the one dealing with these, mate. You just sit there. You do is turn up for an hour each week. I'm the one who gets all the correspondence, mate.
That's what happens when you're the talent.
So, James, you've heard from John. He was very unimpressed with your poem. He's happy with just mine. News items. Aletsky's going to Perth. You've already mentioned that. The Super League Exodus, you've already mentioned that. John, you need to learn that when you send topics, if we end up talking about them anyway, they're sort of woven in. Salary cap increase, we've also mentioned that. So now the latest on the NRL takeover, because there was a bit of movement this week, wasn't there?
Well, there's a story in 4020 magazine, our colleagues at 4020 who had in a report that it could be up to a 250 million 5-year offer for the NRL to invest in Super League, tied to Tony Mestrov, becoming the I'm just having a mini stroke at the moment, becoming the of the RFL, which is all very interesting. Look, my understanding, and I've tried to stand up what I could and speak to a lot of people this week. That hasn't been a formal offer as yet. There hasn't been term set. Now, it seems to me that one Super League club owner, is putting out this 250 million 5-year figure. And it would make sense in that if it was 50 million a year, you could break that down into being, say, 2 to 3 million per year for each Super League club, 14 of them. And then obviously there would then be money that would need to go to the RFL to continue operating. There'd be needed money to go to the Championship to continue existing. And then hopefully you would think some money for marketing and promotion, which is badly needed. Because the Super League clubs at the moment, 12 of them are getting 1.3 million a year from Sky, and York and Toulouse are getting 650 grand. And clubs are losing between 1 to 2 million each year. So you'd think that the offer, if it's going to get support, if it's going to get voted in, it's going to have to be at least 2 to 3 million per club, isn't it?
Well, the other thing is Paul Kent, who tends to have his say on these things, and also can be
to that podcast. Yeah,
and he said he doesn't think the NRL can afford that figure, and.
Well, He was saying that they're going to use money from the federal government, which is the 600 million for PNG. I think that's
illegal.
Probably. Yeah. I don't think that's credible or plausible. Personally, no. I think where the majority of the 50 million, if that is the figure, or if it's something like that, would be 21 or whatever around that from Sky for 3 games a week. Then DAZN would come in with maybe 15 to 20 million for the other 3 games. And then BBC would also show a game. So that there you've got 7 games. BBC wouldn't be paying anything. And then maybe the NRL, whether it be with, increased sponsorship or whatever, maybe it would chip in some money, but
50 pence.
Maybe 5 to 10 million a year. I'm not sure. I don't know that for a fact. This is just, what would be logical. But I think broadcast would be a big part of any investment of it, because obviously the NRL has got the connections and the expertise in actually negotiating, which clearly RFL hasn't in previous years. And also, I've spoken to someone at RL Commercial about this. It would make 0 sense for all of Super League to go to DAZN and be behind it, because DAZN, in terms of subscribers, I don't know how many subscribers it has in the UK, but it's very, very low. While with Sky, it's got a massive subscriber base for pay TV. So you don't want to hide the whole sport behind, a very small pay TV provider that, barely anyone has. So
I genuinely think the loss of Brian Carney and John Wilkin from there, I think the hour they do before games or the half hour they do before some games is adding so much value to the rugby league discussion in the UK right now. So any deal that sees them shelved, it can't be good for the game. And I think when I think of John Wilkin and Brian Carney and what they offer before a game, that's better than what Eddie and Steve-O used to offer. I think Eddie and Steve-O were fantastic in the commentary box, but I think what John and Brian are bringing is some genuine, insightful critique of many of the things that are going on in the game, and you can tell there's real care there. And I think it's fantastic raw talent. I think John Wells has been fantastic over the years too. So I've got to think about these things as well from an English game point of view. Review of games from the last round. And I'm going to go with the most recent one first because I think the world's turned back on its axis today because City won a cup. Tottenham kept losing. Huddersfield decided things aren't great and got rid of their coach. But Hull FC beat Leeds. Hull FC 16-14 to Leeds at half-time, but Hull FC 24, Leeds 16. Tries for Hull from Arthur, Sal, Litton and 6 Hardacre goals. Leeds tries McDonald and Croft, and Connor scored 4 goals. Did you see this game? It's Hull's second victory of the season.
Yeah, it was a really massive result for Hull FC. I think John Cartwright's been under a fair bit of pressure. They'd only won one game, and to be honest, they're not played well all season. They do have a lot of injuries, but they've underperformed so far this year. So I think Leeds coming in off the Challenge Cup loss to Wakefield, which was a bit of a surprise. You would expect them, with their ambitions and their squad to really, to put the boot into Hull FC, and it was anything but. It was a really entertaining game. Leeds' discipline was poor. Miller, I think, made took some poor options, and they were fighting for it, Leeds, but Hull FC just for a lot of energy, a fantastic win for them, and really much needed because I think. Obviously, Luke Robinson has got the axe, and Ryan Carr is another coach under pressure at the moment, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in a sec. But I think John Cartwright, there's been a lot of investment at Hull FC, and they did well last year, and I think the expectation is to replicate that, if not go on further. So I don't think people were happy with the start that they'd have. So big win for them, Jake Arthur, who's copped a lot, was very good today as well.
He got one over his dad.
You did.
Leeds are a great attacking side. I'm going to be interested to look at this game. I forget the time because I think their defence and their defensive structure is their Achilles heel, and I've mentioned it since round 1. And so I'd be interested to see how things unfolded because I think they really need to click in attack to protect their defence, basically. Because I think because of the fast rucks, I think some of the defensive patterns that I'm seeing in Super League aren't conducive to the style of football that's being played. I think the spacings are too wide, and I think because of the speed of the ruck, it's easy for the opposition to get goal forward. So it'll be interesting to look at that. Wigan beat York on Thursday. We did that for After the Hooter straight after the game, and we'll be doing Thursday's game this week too for After the Hooter. The key thing is Wigan won 23-22, but the key thing is that I want to ask you about, is there any update on the York player's injury, McShane?
No, I've not heard anything so far. I'm going to chase that up tomorrow, but...
Which is Monday in...
Yes, yeah, but I mean, sometimes you don't always get a response. So
they're waiting on the NHS, mate. That's the problem. Might be 18. Might be 18 months. Wakefield 18, Lee 14. Tries for Wakey from Tavanga, Myers, and Pratt. 3 goals to Jowett. Lee scored through O'Brien, Charney, and Alec Wayenke, and a goal to Cook. What was this game like, John?
Yeah, I think Lee were much improved. Obviously, they've had a tough start of the season, a lot of injuries as well, but they gave it their all. They're just very much down on troops. I think Wakefield, They did concede a try right at the end, which kind of blew the score perhaps a little bit closer. And then there was a terrible, there was a kick in from Fartilli that O'Brien went to kind of kick away and missed, which was a gift for Wakefield. But look, Wakefield seemed to have turned a bit of corner. A couple of wins now on the bounce from Johnson back, which was massive for them. So, yeah, really a good victory for Wakefield. They'll be very pleased with that. If it wasn't a perfect performance, but at the end of the day, a win is a win, and yeah, picking up a bit of momentum now. The trend.
Wakefield coach Darryl Powell wasn't particularly happy with the performance, but I'm with you. I think it's a good result for Wakefield, and I think they've been quite impressive in their defeats too. So I think Wakefield are going to be in or around it when the whips are cracking. In terms of Lee, apparently they are down to 18 fit players now, and that can't help. But even so, the 18 that were left were very poor with their discipline, and it was a 7-1 penalty count at half time. And in the second half, Jack Hughes got sin-binned after they'd conceded a stream of first half penalties. So I don't care who goes on the field. If you're ill-disciplined, you're always going to pay the price, particularly in this quick ruck 6 again era that we are in. Bradford only scored 4 at half time, and Huddersfield had 2 on the board. But by the end of the game, it was 26-14 to Bradford. Bradford's tries ruin. They weren't ruin anything. They won. Nicarima scored 2. I think they're his first 2 for the club, aren't they? And Hooley.
His debut, yeah. It was his debut. He'd been injured before, in pre-season and hadn't played for them. So, yeah, this was a really close game, very tight. And it was the Nicarima show, really, second half. I think both the tries, the highlights that I saw, he basically just really took the line on, ran hard, and, took 2 or 3 players over the line with him. So just pure strength. So, yeah, a good win. I mean, Huddersfield look at the whipping boys of the competition at the moment. So I think Bradford, would have been expecting to win this game at home. But again, Bradford have, lost players from last weekend. They had to draft in, as did Huddersfield, to draft in some loanees. But good for Bradford, and obviously, it proved to be the final 80 minutes for Luke Robinson.
Hooley contributed 10 points to Bradford's score with a try and 3 goals. Atkin kicked 2 others. Huddersfield's tries came from Powell and Gagai, and Russell kicked 3 goals. 3rd successive home Super League win for Bradford, and a 5th successive league defeat for Huddersfield, and Luke Robinson is in the dole queue this week. Toulouse 16, St Helens 30. It was 28-0 at half-time. Laguerre, Paulselli and Dupree scored tries for Toulouse. Shorrocks kicked 2. I can't help but think that this was after the fact that they'd been put to the sword, basically, and St Helens took their foot off the pedal somewhat. Parsi, Murphy scored 2. Clemmer got off the neutral run. Is that his first try for the season? Cross scored for St Helens. Hastings slotted over 5 goals, and a dominant first half from St Helens, John.
Yeah, they were electric in that first half. They were throwing the ball around, making line breaks. Toulouse were like rabbits in the headlights. So Tristan Saylor, especially in attack, was fantastic. That leap that he did, and then the offload off the ground for Clemmer's try was beautiful. And I think St Helens, they lost their luggage. A bit of an airline mix-up, so they had a bit of adversity going into the game. But yeah, they were fantastic. St Helens again, a lot of young players in there, and I think it might have even been a debut or 2, but missing quite a few players. But that was a really good performance. I think they also lost George Whitby to HIA, who was off the bench. So yeah, dealing with adversity, and it was just it was a first half demolition. So disappointing for Toulouse, because the game at 28-0 was virtually over. They did come back into it, but comfortable from St Helens in the end.
I think we're going to talk about this next game in a bit of detail. Warrington 72, Castleford 6. I want to talk about Castleford first. I've been championing the fact that they've not been going too bad even though they've been losing games.
Yeah.
And people must think I've been on the Amsterdam cakes after what happened at the weekend, because I can't explain that one, because I've been studying Warrington too. I did an analysis on them last week. The defence is vastly improved. Their attack looked a tiny bit clunky at times, as if timing was a little bit off. They obviously got their timing perfect. But when you lose a game 72-6, like Castleford did, it was 32-6 at half time. It literally seems to me Castleford did not turn up at all.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that's fair. I mean, they lost the captain, Joe Stimson, early for an HIA in the start of the game, but they were dreadful, Cass. I think part of it was Warrington were really up for this, and they were on fire, but Cass were utterly awful. And I think Ravalawa, the winger, Jesus, he has had a shocking start to his Castleford career. I think a lot of the tries were scored on his edge, but look, the loss wasn't down to him. Like, there was poor performances all across the Cass team, and Ryan Carr really gave it. He unleashed in his post-match presser. I think he used victim mentality, and he was very blunt with his players. And I've been the same as you, Lee, in what I've seen from Cass. Obviously, they beat Huddersfield, and I think they were pretty credible in round one against Wigan. I'm just trying to remember the other games. They weren't great against Toulouse, but they've been competitive, and this was just kind of out of character. I caught up with Ryan Carr in pre-season, and there's a lot of change at Castleford around the stadium and everything, and a lot of new players coming in. But this was a real low point. The biggest hiding that we've had so far this season. 5 rounds in?
I dare say it's one of the biggest defeats Castleford have suffered too.
I think you're right. Yeah, for a long, long time. I think it's something like 20 odd years.
Oh, right, it's not that long, really. When a club is perennially near the bottom, right? So Huddersfield are a perfect example. Castleford have had moments where they've been a bit higher, etc. But there tends to be something a lot more than just the coach. Now, I think the difference between Ryan Carr and Luke Robinson is Ryan Carr has only just arrived, and there'll be things within the walls at Castleford, within the DNA of the club, that have impacted this result this weekend. And if you compare that to, say, Lee and Hull KR, who are struggling for wins at the moment, it's probably the other way there. There's probably been a little bit of subconscious relaxation because they've been going so well. What's the term I'm looking for? Complacency. It's early morning still for me, John. And then they met a red-hot Warrington, and I think one thing that's happened here is Castleford have turned up not quite in the right frame of mind. Was this a Saturday game?
It was, Saturday afternoon game.
Right. They've only scored one try. Valame scored and Weaver kicked the goal. But Warrington look like they've put on a clinic. But just looking at the details, Castleford just can't have turned up. Curry scored 2 tries for Warrington. Ashton scored 3, but not to be outdone, Tanganoa scored 4. Hopewati scored 1. Stone and Harrison. Goals 12 from Irwin. They've got to support Ryan Carr because they need change at that, John. They need to support him because this isn't a coach thing. Because when I look at this result compared to the other performances I've seen, it makes the other performances look like they've overachieved because they've got this in them.
Yeah, I mean, we're not doing a deep dive on Cass right now, but you can look at, after the Darryl Powell era, And obviously they had that high point of, 2017 when they made the grand final, won the league leaders. They never really have seemed to able to move on from that. Clearly, they've had a lot of coaches. Lee Radford was there for a bit. Andy Last was there for a bit. They had, whose name escapes me. He's now at Sheffield. Craig Lingard, Danny Maguire, and now obviously Ryan Carr. And a lot of new players have come in as well. Chris Chester's come in last year. So yeah, I think there needs to be time at Castleford. Look, I think some of the recruitment hasn't been great, and I think some of those players are not up to it. But I think there needs to be time, because I think just constantly sacking a coach doesn't get you the right, with the hope of the next coach being better than the last or getting more out of the group. I don't think that works. And if you look at Ryan Carr's career, he did a great job at Featherstone, had a fair bit of time under Brad Arthur at Para, fair bit of time at St George Illawarra under Flanagan. I think he is a good coach. But that was, they were so soft, Cass, particularly in defence. It was just like a knife through butter at times. And Warrington, they're undefeated. They're 4 from 4. They've not played, a whole KR or a Wigan as of yet, but they did beat St Helens in round 1. And got to credit, gave some credit to Sam Burgess on Twitter, because he was close to getting sacked last year. Undefeated. And obviously they had a change. They got rid of Martin Gleeson and brought in Steve McNamara, and everyone was quick to point out it's all Steve McNamara, which is interesting because he got sacked by but yeah, Steve McNamara is a good coach. I'm not saying that he isn't, but I think there's more than just an assistant coach coming in. There's been a lot of change at Warrington. They moved on a few players, Dufty being a big one. There was discipline issues. But they've turned around a corner big time, Warrington. It's still early, and a lot can happen. But fair play to them for what they've done early on in the season.
Huge win for Catalans, 26, 2 tries to Lipovic, Navarrete scored 1, and Mark scored 1. Not surname Mark, not first name Mark. Goals from Sexton, who scored 5. Hull KR scored 20 points. But again, Catalans were well ahead at half-time, 14-6. Hull KR's tries came from May, Burgess, Amon, and 4 goals from Lewis. Hull Kingston Rovers have suffered their 3rd defeat in their opening 4 games. They got the customary win at Huddersfield. Catalans were 20-6 up at one point after the hour. So again, I think problems at Hull KR. I think, look, I read the Australian news and every other day it's Willie Peters is in demand here, Willie Peters in demand there, and Willie Peters is a friend, etc. He wants to sign a contract quickly, I think, because it looks like his OKR team are unravelling somewhat.
Yeah, I don't know about unravelling. I think you might be a touch harsh there. But look, this was a fantastic game from the neutral point of view. I think people forget how difficult it is to go to Catalans and win there. But the Dragons were fantastic. As I said, they lost, I think it was 4 players during the game. Their players were dropping like flies. And they really took it to Hull KR. They were really committed. Didn't stop the effort. The try from Mark at the end, set up by Fatapi with the offload, drawing the 2 players, was brilliant. And this was just a really gutsy display by the Dragons. And you were all right with Hull KR. There was a few, moments where Mikey Lewis was arguing with Jez Litton and players playing for penalties. Hick, who was really bad attempts to tackle in defence on a few of those tries. Just standards maybe not where they need to be for Hull KR. Not a great start for them. Joel Tompkins, massive credit to him and the Catalans boys for what they did there. It was a really, really big win and showed a lot of courage.
The title win last year for Hull KR was built on defence.
Yep.
They averaged 9 points against them a game in the finals, 11 in the competition. They are leaking a lot of points this year. The second half against Brisbane, a game that they'd won in the first half, they shipped the points in the second half. There's so many things in Hull KR's game. I looked at them quite a lot in depth prior to the World Club Challenge. If you look at the Rugby League Coach YouTube, and I found some things that weren't quite up to scratch, that weren't exposed. And now the faster rucks could be causing Hull KR real problems. And they just don't look like they've adapted to me just yet. And like I stand by it, Willie Peters needs to sign a contract quick at Perth or Manly or England or wherever, because it's going to be tough. I said this on this podcast a few weeks ago. Nothing fails like success. People ease off a little bit. People start getting a bit excited about where they are in life, and they lose that edge sometimes. That raison d'etre, that edge that drives them over the line. And there was big forces pushing Hull KR over the line last year. The fact they'd not won a title for 40 years, the fact that they've been in the shadow of their neighbours, Hull FC, for so much of that. And I also think the loss of McLaurin and Jared Wawira-Hargraves are two very big people within the organisation and on the field that are being missed too. So look, quite often to win a title or titles, it's the fusion of so many things. It's certain players in the peak of their career at that time, with some youngsters and with some senior players. And then if some of those things are just slightly different the year after, things can be very different. And so far on this current evidence, John, they look very different. We're getting some questions, John.
I'll just say, just to add to your point there, Lee, I think second season syndrome, in the sense that it's very hard to go back to back, isn't it? Mm-hmm. It's very difficult. And they won 4 trophies in a row, which is a phenomenal feat. Mm-hmm. But you wonder how long those standards can start. But I don't think, I think they can come back this season. I don't think it's all over for them in March. And also on the Willie Peters thing, I don't know this for a fact, but I think it's unlikely that he'd leave mid-season. I think if he goes,
he just needs to sign the contract.
Yeah,
sign the contract. I'll see you at the end of the year.
Yeah, because I think taking over a club mid-season is fraught with a lot of difficulties, isn't it?
No, I never suggested that. I just need to sign the contract.
No,
sign the contract.
That's a fair point.
Yeah. Adam M asked us, why do some coaches' fans seem to feel obligated to an even penalty count? Novel concept, but maybe a lopsided penalty count, maybe because one team isn't performing as well as the other. E.g. York 6 against count versus Wigan was huge as they kept interfering with the ball in the ruck. Well, I'll just start with this. Peter Volandes made a great point last week about the clamour for the 6 against to be reduced, even though I think the referees might have done it a little bit in the NRL, just reduced it a little bit because the score lines were blowing out, and they seem to have blown out a little less this weekend. But he said, over to you. He said, stop breaking the rules. And, to me, that's a mic drop moment. And I guess to this question from Adam, I don't know if coaches and fans seem obligated for it to be even. I just don't think they appreciate a 7-1, an 8-1, a 10-1, because every time I've been on the end of one of those as a coach, I've looked at the opposition doing exactly the same things as us, if not worse. So, yes, York would have interfered with the ball in the ruck, but I'm sure Wigan did too, but just maybe did it a little bit smarter, or...
Well, you know as a coach more than me, Lee, but I'm sure every coach, teaches their team to try and bend the rules where you can and get away with what you can. Obviously, you don't go out there to cheat in every area, but if you can, get half a metre, you're doing 9.5 metres and get away with that, or you can just hold down that player in the ruck, an extra second or half a second, you do that, don't you? Sometimes you get away with it, sometimes you don't. I think
too much credit gets given to coaches for these things. It's actually players that are grubby bastards half the time. I have never coached a team to be it dirty or rip the ball or anything like that. But I've coached plenty of players who did rip at the ball, who did do dirty things because that was just in their makeup, and they did everything they could to hide it from me. So players, football IQ is a thing too, and what a coach has to do is control that basically and make sure it doesn't get out of hand. Mark Williamson asked a fantastic question. How can you plan to attack on a pitch with Odsel's dimensions? So for those who don't know, it's quite significantly thinner. Post-Giants game, Robinson basically said, run hard for the first 5, then kick and hope for the best. Surely there's more to it, decoy runs and dummy lines. Mark, well, I will say that game plan obviously didn't help Robinson because he's now, this week, looking for a new job. I am probably going to analyse Bradford this week, John. And what I've seen so far from Bradford is the coach is asking them to play some football. But the key why it's successful at the moment is they are playing football coming out of their own 20 sometimes, and they're not playing stupidly risky football. They're just moving the ball around, nice offloads when it's on, not when it's risky. They've also got quite a decent back three that get them some good go forward. Now, if you look at Bradford's success in their Super League era, 1997 stands out like dogs' appendages because they were huge. They were huge, and if I remember rightly, it was unlimited interchange era as well. And they just rolled over teams. And that's one way of beating a team on a thinner pitch. Another way is to, and a lot of teams do this anyway, and I don't understand why they do it so incessantly, but actually to set up in the middle of the field and split your halves so that people can run lines like Mark said, decoy runs back on the angle, etc., and so forth. Whereas Bradford at the moment are moving the ball, I think, in their own half quite a bit, but they're moving it smartly. People always think passing the ball is risky. Well, it's not risky if you do it smartly and you've worked on your skills. Yeah. So, Mark, please look out for that analysis video this week because I think I will look at Bradford. Have you got anything to add to that based on what you've seen, John?
No, I mean, I agree with you. I think, historically the Bradford teams had massive wingers and massive centres and huge packs, didn't they? And I think, bashing someone through the middle is one way to do it. Obviously playing off fast rucks, interchange of passing, inside and out, and moving the ball quickly and, from deep as well is another thing. And Bradford have done that not only when they're playing at Odsal this season, but also, at the likes of St Helens and other Hull FC, the games that I've seen them, they've been doing that really well, and it's obviously something that they've been working on, and they've been very successful with so far.
Because they're not being lateral in the sense that they're trying to go around teams. They're being lateral and still trying to play through teams basically a lot, and then that gets them go forward with the fast rucks, and then they play. So.
For me, I watch a lot of NRL, watch a lot of Super League, and it's something more teams should be doing from deep. You see they'll get to a last tackle and they'll be 30 metre from their own try line, and they're halfway at the ball, and he's got a 2-man overlap on his left, and he just kicks it. And you just think you've just got to shift the ball, which you should be able to do because you're a professional footballer and you have the skill. But obviously, there is that risk, and some coaches would rip a halfback's head if he decided to play from there. But I like to see teams do that because it adds that bit of jeopardy. It's a bit more entertaining. It's less predictable. I applaud any team who can do it, and they're doing it in the right frame of manner. They're doing it, as you said, when it's on, not just throwing caution to the wind and trying to do it.
And they're not taking undue risks. If you've got the ability to catch and pass a football, passing and catching the football isn't a risk.
And every professional footballer should be able to catch and pass a football for each way. Right, left and right.
Listen to this week's Rugby League Coach podcast, everybody. And I've opened with a story about Pep Guardiola, who at the time of my recording had won 40 trophies. Well, right now, the podcast is already out of date because he's won 41 trophies. And his ex-player, Carl Walker, said as soon as he arrived at Manchester City, he realised Pep didn't like players running in training, not just doing conditioning, getting flogged. He wanted a ball at the feet all the time.
Yeah, it's a different mentality, yeah.
Right. NRL, Todd Payton's backside isn't twitching as much this week. He got the win over Gold Coast Titans, although the squeaky bum might have been in the other coaching box. The Titans coach, Josh Hannay, might be a bit worried about the job he's taken on. Penrith and Warriors setting the pace, and it's a bit of a appendage measuring contest, I think, between their fans as to who's had the better start. And I also want you, John, to consider the form of Cronulla, who have started quite strangely. Yeah. So, Cowboys, Penrith, Warriors, and Cronulla.
Yeah, I didn't see a huge amount of NRL this weekend. I really enjoyed the Broncos game. That was a fantastic game, and obviously the Broncos coming back to win that, with all the drama that's gone on with Gordy and Madge and everything. But really surprised by Cronulla because I think Fitzgibbon is a fantastic coach, and they've been top 4 the last couple of years. So that's a bit of a puzzle. Penrith just look immaculate, don't they? You don't win grand finals in March, but they have started the season really, really well. Just look effortless at the moment. And the Cowboys, the Gold Coast, it's a bit like Cass, isn't it? Like they're just a club that, they've been down there for a long time, and I think it's going to be a painful rebuild for Josh Hannay. He needs a lot of time there. I know they've locked up a few players like Tino and Cooper Bye, and I think have they locked up Campbell, or they've got some building blocks there. So. Yeah, they've got some building blocks there. I think with the Gold Coast, one of the issues, much like Newcastle, is that they lose a lot of their best local juniors. So Payne Haas, a Gold Coast junior, Reece Walsh is a Gold Coast junior. They've got to try and keep those best players there. But with the Cowboys, we'll just one win is great for Todd Payton. We'll see how they go the rest of the year though. So because I think if they lose next weekend, the pressure just ramps right back up.
I think in the conversation vis-a-vis Penrith and Warriors, the amazing thing is who they've played, and the other amazing thing is Penrith's defence. Penrith haven't conceded many points at all in this era where points are coming thick and fast. Penrith have played and beaten last year's premiers, Roosters, who were many people's favourites for the competition, and Cronulla, who were preliminary finalists and seem to be perennial preliminary finalists. Try saying that 10 times. The Warriors have beaten last year's minor premiers. They've beaten Newcastle in Newcastle, and they've beaten the Roosters, who were many people's favourites for the competition this year. So already you could say these guys are answering questions that you'd want to ask of them too. I think what gives Penrith the edge is the fact that they're just not leaking points, which is amazing in this current era.
And the Warriors have a history of imploding mid-season, even after starting well, while Penrith have a history of just winning things, don't they? And they still have that ridiculously good spine, ridiculously good squad, and also that pathway is, the young ginger, is it Jenkins?
Ginger.
Didn't they cut him a few years ago, and then he's come back, and now he's on
they
fire.
cut him because he's ginger?
Yeah, I believe it was gingivitis. It was
every good team needs a redhead, mate. I'm telling you.
Yeah,
that now.
Mate, Paddy Vaughan.
The Cowboys have got an easy home fixture next week. Melbourne Storm on the back of a defeat. So.
Yeah, you would have hated to have been the Storm after that. What were they? Were they 14-0 up at half time? The Storm players with Bellamy, he would have been ripping things off, the doors off, and I
actually think what I know of Bellamy I think he's just in the coaching box is a lunatic. I think everywhere else he's a bit more measured. He's brutal with his words, but he's not Des Hasler ripping dressing room doors off kind of thing. If you think about it, how many times have you seen footage of Craig Bellamy going off in the sheds?
I think I don't. Yeah, he's not a ranter and rave of 24/7, but I think he's very honest with his players.
Oh yeah, there's nothing wrong with that.
I think he would not have expected or been happy with that second half that they dished up. And full credit to the Broncos for coming back and winning, because they've been in the sights of everyone, haven't they? In basically the rugby league media, and there's been a lot of shit thrown around, and they answered a few of their critics with that win.
I'm looking forward to watching Castleford against Bradford on Thursday night UK time, Friday morning Australian time. I don't know why you're smiling, because I actually think you're smiling because you're happy to be in my company, but Cass need to win this game. Castleford need a performance.
They do. They need a performance. I mean, you wouldn't probably say it's a must-win game, but they do need a performance. They need to show, that they care for the badge, and they need to put their bodies on the line. And Bradford have a great start of the season, so they're going to be a tough opponent. And the Cass fans, they're not happy. So
maybe I could help Ryan Carr by finding the weaknesses in the Bradford side that he can exploit on Thursday.
I'll send you over his number, and you can give him a call.
No. I'll text him my analysis video that I do. On Friday, Hull Kingston Rovers host Saints.
Yeah, really interesting game. That Hull KR, as you said, been a very average start of the season. St Helens are flying. They are missing a lot of players, but that's a tough away game for them. So that could be a humdinger of a game.
And my prediction for that game, the team that plays in red and white will win.
Well, I reckon one of them will be in a horrible away kit. So
true. Or not that plays in red and white at home. York and Wakey also on Friday. Winnable for York again?
Yeah, I mean, look, when they lost Liam Harris before the Wigan game, I thought away to Wigan, they'll battle, but they'll be well beaten, and they're probably unlucky not to come away with a draw, or at least go to Golden Point in that game. So yeah, the McShane one is really interesting. If McShane's out, you definitely, I think, lead, or the bookies will lead with Wakefield being slight favourites. But that's an interesting 50-50 game for me.
Wigan have a training run against Huddersfield on Saturday, and Lee host Toulouse. I think Toulouse are finding life a bit hard now. Yeah,
I think this round was interesting because, there's been a lot of talk about how well the promoted teams are doing, and they are doing well. But you can also argue that there isn't enough, and that's why the foreign quota was it was increased, shall I say, from 7
Put
to 10.
Put your teeth in, Johnny.
Yeah, there isn't enough, talent around to go around for 14 teams. I think. Well, I stand by that, and I think.
Me too.
As the season goes on, more injuries, etc., then there's going to be, some more blowouts and some teams struggling. And we've already seen Castleford and Huddersfield struggling, and Toulouse, they've got to back up every week. And look, Lee, barely got anyone fit, but you definitely give them a chance, particularly at home. Wigan, that could be a cricket stall.
Ever since I christened them 2 wins Olympique, I think they must have liked that name, because they've not got past 2 wins yet. On Sunday, Hull FC play the Catalans.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one, because Catalans picking up a bit of form now. Obviously, again, 4 players lost to their
injury. So Hull FC.
Yeah, and Hull FC, as I said, that was a big result over Leeds, so that's a tasty one. And then Leeds Warrington, the 30-year anniversary game. Warrington undefeated, Leeds now with 2 losses in a row, but back at home. So, look, I think
was that one of the first round games 30 years ago?
It was, I believe. I think the first ever game was Sheffield.
Sheffield and Paris. Yeah. Do you remember that?
I don't, mate, because I was 15, and
You didn't have the ability to
there was no
process
pay
things.
TV. There
Oh,
was no
right.
pay TV.
I thought you were one of them children that's developed slowly and you couldn't.
No, well, I have. That's a different story. But, no, I've seen the highlights and it looked, I mean, the fact that they were playing in Paris was pretty cool. I think there was like 16,000 fans there. I think something like 5,000 fans from Sheffield flew over, which is, considering Sheffield get about 500 people to a game now, like that's quite remarkable. But yeah, I think the Leeds Warrington 30 years ago was one of the opening round fixtures.
I remember it vividly, Johnny D. And
your team were in the championship, weren't
they? Yes. And
Salford, that is, yeah.
Yeah. And maybe a month earlier, less than a month, had been freezing cold in February on the terraces at Salford, watching Salford. And then about a month later, there was this place that by then I'd never been to Paris by then. I was there, I think, a year later or 2 years later. It was packaged differently. The players were led out one by one. Steve-O called the names out, pronounced, absolutely butchered the French names. The video referee, which was a new thing, and it felt like a brand new dawn. And yeah, bit like Miss World saying, "Yeah, Lee, we'll go out next week," and then you cock a hoop for a week, and then Miss World texts you or messages you on Insta and says, "Sorry, I can't make it." That's how I felt. Because Paris were gone 2 years later, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that the Paris thing was kind of built on sand, and they were all most Aussies who didn't even have visas to play in France. But look, I think, trying to look on the positive side, it was bold, it was brash, it was exciting, wasn't it? And they were full time for the first time, everyone. And yeah, Sky really got behind it. So 30 years of ups and downs and ups and. Yeah, big moments and but bit to celebrate, I would say.
We should have a gone but not forgotten cup. Paris, that Wales team that disappeared.
Crusaders, yeah, we could go all day.
Oh, Crusaders are still Toronto.
Yep.
Who else have we lost?
Well, in terms of dead clubs, I mean.
We could throw in they're not dead, but we could have a World Club Challenge.
Yeah, I mean, Gateshead.
Newtown Jets, North Sydney Bears, Gateshead.
Yeah, Gateshead.
London Scholars.
What do we have? London Chargers? Did we have London Chargers?
Fulham.
I mean, Fulham weren't in Super League, but yeah, they were. Yeah, we've had a lot of different renames. I think Workington Town were in the first
Brighton.
year and haven't been. Yeah,
if you HUY.
If you want to go through every dead rugby league club from Northampton to what was the one? What's the third Leeds club that was around for 5 minutes? There was another Leeds club.
Oh.
It was Leeds, Hunslet, and there was another one which. Yeah, there was Blackpool. Blackpool existed for a while.
I played for them. Chorley
Chorley
Lynx, Chorley Panthers.
Wasn't there one in Liverpool as well that lasted about 5 minutes?
No, you're thinking of the Buccaneers. I think I coached them and played for them.
Ken Invicta. Yeah, look.
Kent Invicta. Who's the? I'm trying to think who this Leeds one is.
Yeah, I can't think. I know of it. I just can't think of it at the moment.
Phil
I think
Kaplan will know.
Yeah, I think Scully was involved with them at one point. Or there's
Hunter Mariners, Adelaide Rams. What a competition this is, John, that we're setting. South Queensland Crushers.
Yeah.
Gold Coast's 15 different monikers.
Northern Eagles. Yeah.
Northern Eagles. What a comp.
Yeah.
What a comp. Glebe Dirty Reds.
Yeah, they're still going around.
Yeah, they are.
Got James Seguiaro and Brad Takarangi playing for them this week, apparently. Yeah.
Bumper podcast, John.
Yes, we better wrap it up.
You'll have to pay me my overtime.
Yep. Checks in the mail. You might get in your 3,000.
Contact details, please.
Get me on
Not
X
for the
John
invoice, for the
Davidson, and you can get me on Facebook at John Davidson Journalist.
Johnny D. Davidson. And I'm admin at rugbyleaguecoach.com.au, email rugbyleaguecoach.com.au, website, and at Rugby League Coach on socials, apart from X, where I am at RL Coach on the net. Take care. We'll see you after the Hooter on Thursday night.